What I find interesting, though, is that as engineering teams and organizations have continued to migrate towards the DevOps way of thinking, we've seen effectively a failure of the concept of platform. Hi, folks. Robert Starmer, bringing you another episode of Cumulus on Cloud. Today, without our fabulous co-host, Lou Tucker. Lou was just unable to attend and join us today for our conversation. But I did actually want to talk about, wait for it. Yes, that's right, cloud computing. But more importantly, I really wanted to talk about this idea of platform as a new paradigm for development. Of course, as we all know, platform is not new. The idea of platform as a service is actually embedded in the model that the National Institutes of Standard and Technology, at least here in the US, has developed as of 2010, 2011 sort of timeframe, defining this concept of platform as a service. What I find interesting, though, is that as engineering teams and organizations have continued to migrate towards the DevOps way of thinking, we've seen effectively a failure of the concept of platform. Um, Early on, I think DevOps had two sort of branches in terms of the developer mindset. And for small teams, I think DevOps is still the way to move forward with development and development paradigms. The pizza team scale, I think, really does do well when, up to that sort of level, you only have a few people working on anything. And so everybody being able to interact with everything makes a lot of sense. Now, I would say that if you're at a pizza team scale, if you have 8 or 10 people working on something, I guess 8, most pizzas aren't 10 slices. So if you have about 8 people working on something, you already likely have some differentiation. You probably have somebody who's focused more on the front end of the system, somebody who's focused more on some of the back end and underlying infrastructure components, and likely somebody who's even thinking about operations. Maybe you've even gone so far as to have somebody who only thinks about observability. Now, and that's in a small team. The idea of DevOps, though, means that anybody can develop anything at any time and develops the entire chain from initial idea and implementation all the way through into production. I think having that mindset, that understanding of the end-to-end process is great. But I think as soon as we go outside of that pizza team sort of scale, where, as I've pointed out, we've already started to differentiate, we get out of the ability to really say, yes, everybody can do the entire soup to nuts process. Do you really want somebody who's focused on UI and UX and presentation, thinking about how you're also going to do database backups and restore operations in the case of some sort of failure? Probably not the best use of their time. So I actually liken this to, if we think about some other environments, like, for example, scuba or diving in general, right? We can think of a startup is somebody who is into snorkeling. It's a way to go diving. You get a little bit better visibility, right? You have a little bit of equipment, but you can do it yourself. Now, I think most water sports, they recommend you have somebody else with you. But even for snorkeling or the more advanced snorkeling, something like snuba, where you actually have a compressor that you tow around, but you're limited within the water envelope that you can get to help protect yourself. Because as you get into actual diving, where they do recommend buddies, where your team starts to grow, maybe you even go diving with a group of people. So you have a dive master and you have a specific, goal in mind and things like this, it gets a little bit more complicated. There's a little bit more differentiation. There's a leader versus followers in the process, usually. There's also the same ocean buddy paradigm that comes to play with that. But this idea that you can actually get an end-to-end process working is it starts to differentiate as soon as you get into the slightly more technical aspects or the team grows larger. And of course, the extreme version of that in our little diving analogy is technical diving, where you probably have a dive organizer who isn't even going to dive. You have an equipment manager who's looking just to make sure that all the technical equipment is working in the best operating order. If you're doing really deep dives for some reason, you probably also have to stage a bunch of equipment. So you have to manage the whole process of getting into the point of actually being able to do the diving that you're trying to accomplish. And if you get into things like submarines and other equipment, then you get more and more differentiation. The point is that even with something that's got nothing to do with generic development technology, we see that at very small scale, you can do it all yourself. Even in small teams, you can still do it all yourself. But as soon as you get into more complicated systems, more deployable systems, that's when you start to really see a need to be able to differentiate your team. At the same time, you want to have some consistency in those processes. And this is where platform really comes to bear. Now, if we sort of rewind just a little bit, platform as a service was this idea that all of the infrastructure is still dynamic, on demand, network attached, measurable. I'm missing one, elastic. In terms of its functionality, but you weren't thinking about infrastructure components. You were thinking about, I can take my application and I could put it on this platform, and the platform handles a number of the underlying tasks in an automated fashion. To me, that's what really drives cloud anyway. So in our diving analogy, right, the platform is our technical diving process, our snuba, our snorkel, right? And those platforms are consistent. Anybody who has learned how to snorkel can use a snorkel to go do their job, get in the water. Right? Anybody who has learned how to do scuba can actually do scuba, or even snuba, which is very similar in a way, at any level, up and down the chain. And this, I think, is really the value of platform. It gives you a consistent set of processes, and it automates some of those components. Right? I don't have to think about getting air into my lungs by just breathing. I have a system, a scuba tank, and a regulator to make sure that that air is always available to be delivered. Right? So I have all of these different components, and platform in the developer sense is the same thing. I already have tools that will automate my tests as soon as I deliver a test to the system. I have tools that will automate my build as soon as I give it the code that I want it to build into a deployable container, for example, right? And it's this platform benefit that really comes to bear, especially as I start to differentiate my teams. I can have folks that just focus on building that platform, making sure that that works, and using the exact same DevOps style mentality and the exact same platform style mentality. I have a template for, if I need a virtual resource, a virtual machine or a container, I have one path that is my default path for enabling that resource. So this is really the benefit of platform as a service. Consistency in how you interact with it, consistency in the ability to define templates, for example, for doing things repeatably, and just a better way of managing your team and the integration that they are going to provide. So much like diving, developing can also be considered something where, as you grow in the size of your team and the technicality of what you're trying to accomplish, having a consistent tool set to work with, a platform, and a team that actually manages that platform is incredibly useful. So that's really what I wanted to get out today, was to talk just at least briefly about this idea of platform and how important it is to effectively all of the processes that we work with these days. Platform as a service is a thing, and it is out there, and so you can do it as a service. Or if you're big enough, maybe the platform that you're using is infrastructure as a service, and yet you're leveraging this idea of a platform to differentiate your services from your developers having to think about the underlying pieces, right? That's not to say that they aren't going to think about, hey, I want to build a serverless style infrastructure, or I would like, this classic 3-tier application with scalability embedded in it. But they don't have to think about what style of load balancer, what kind of integration does the load balancer need to have. All I know is that I want a secured path through an API into a middleware component or set of components, and those middleware components need to be securable, have authentication, etc. That's the type of thing you want the developer thinking about. But even better is to say, hey, we have an authentication mechanism that you can leverage. We have a scale mechanism that you can leverage. All you have to do is tell us you want this component to scale. You want this database style of resource. You don't have to think about managing the database. These are huge benefits to the developer. Accelerate your development, make your platform and your operations much more consistent. People that are still in that operation space, that platform space, now have a consistent model for how an application is going to be deployed, at least for the most part. And that also really improves the overall life cycle and benefits from the system. So this has been Robert Starmer. Lou will be back next time, and we'll get further into things like platform and AI and machine learning and all of the other cloudy bits that we all love and love to talk about so much. Thanks for your time.